everyone. Sorry about the delay. Just had to get stuff shared around, so we will go ahead and get started here in just a moment. Let me finish getting my paint station set up the way I want it. I need to find something better to do with some of these cables than what I have currently. So I've done some audio adjustments. I am not sure what has happened to my camera setting for my wet palette. That's fun. Let's see here. It should not be like that. There we go. That's better. Not sure how that got that way. All right. Get my wet palette out here. Get my wash brush put away. And let's see how this wet palette fared overnight with parchment paper rather than. It looks pretty wet. But I think we can make it work. Alright. So we're going to start by highlighting up our skin tones. Let me show you where we're at with the miniatures. So, let's see if I can get them in focus here. I feel like my wet palette is way overexposed. Okay. Technical difficulties, I do apologize. Alright. Let's try this one more time. Here's where we're at with the miniature. Base coat and a wash. And the gallows looks about the same. So bear with me, I'm a little bit stuffy tonight. Not sure what's going on. If you're joining, thanks for joining. Glad to have you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that. If you watched my part 1, I have a flesh tone and a little bit of hardened carapace in it. And I'm going to start working on highlighting some of these flesh tones. And it's a little bit thinner than I normally would. To really try to get some smooth transitions with the thinner. And I'm pulling the thin paint towards the highest points of highlight. And this is going to be a pretty broad highlights here. So this is essentially our base color that we're re-highlighting with after our wash. And we'll probably give this a couple of different coats of this because it's really thin. Try to make sure you're not going into the recesses with it. So this is an Army Painter tanned flesh with some hardened carapace mixed in, because that's how I've been doing my army. So we're going to do some of the face with this. I say army, how I've been doing this game. It's actually a board game. For those not familiar with Kingdom, that's Monster. It's a boutique board game that can be very pricey, but the miniatures are great. I know there's controversy about some of the pinup models that they make. I don't personally paint or own any of the pinup models, so that's how I do it. I just don't buy the models I don't like. If you're watching, thanks for joining me on this Sunday evening if you're live, or whenever you happen to be watching. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to take a look at my videos, and feel free to comment on the video, let me know what you think. If you really like it, like and subscribe and turn on notifications and you'll get told when I go live. Last week and this week are going to be a little bit lighter schedules as far as streaming. Last week I had family vacation, and then this week I've got Gen Con, so I won't be doing any live streams beyond Tuesday at the latest. I may not be streaming Tuesday night either, because I'll probably be trying to get some rest before heading out to Gen Con Wednesday. But I'm going to try to do some videos from Gen Con, just some, take some videos. I'll have my son with me. Thursday I'll be playing in the Star Wars Legion tournament. So I don't know how much videos I'll get done there. So I'm just taking the super fine detail brush here and I'm hitting the highlights on the skin. Again, I'm still working with that base tone of hardened carapace and tanned flesh from Army Painter. And it's pretty thin paint consistency that I'm working with here. My basing is done with a much more broad brush. This is a very fine tip brush that I've been real careful to make sure that I keep a good point on for doing this kind of work. So we're not going to take these highlights all the way under the arm. We're going to leave some of it shaded under there. And he's got all these little veins all over his skin. We'll come back and we're going to probably going to mix a little bit of a blue tone in to that skin tone to highlight those up later. But for now, we're going to leave them alone for the most part. Alright, don't forget this arm here that's on his coat if you're painting him. The detached hand that he's taken off of somebody. Kind of grotesque, but hey. And we're going to mix in some green, like decomposing colors into that skin tone on that arm later. So this is lots of thin layers is what we're doing here. Again, that's how you can kind of avoid some of the brush stroke marks and things like that, is lots of thin layers. I do realize I missed his hair when I was doing base coating. I didn't even think about it, so we'll have to come up with a color for that, and we can fix that easily later. So he's got all kinds of little lines on the front of his neck. Alright, on his gallows, he has a hand there as well. And we need to make sure we highlight that. So it kind of sits like that, so we'll make sure we highlight accordingly. Remember, if you're painting the pieces separate from each other, make sure you take into account how they'll be oriented on the model when you're doing your highlights. I have accidentally forgotten and highlighted a model that I was like, oh, these highlights look great, and then put it on the model and realized that I highlighted it like 90 degrees to how it's oriented on the model. And while the highlights looked great, they didn't look great on the model. So make sure you keep that in mind as you're working. Alright. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some thin down tanned flesh, and we're going to go a little bit lighter. Just mix it directly in because we won't need that base color anymore. Super thin. And then now we can go back to our main piece here. So we're going to do smaller areas here. And then to lighten it up beyond that, I'm probably going to mix in a little bit of skeleton bone for the next highlights, because I want to desaturate the color a little bit. I don't want him to look like he's like this tanned Adonis god or something like that. I want him to look sickly and like he's been unexposed to the sun for a while. He hasn't seen sun in a bit. So, smaller areas, like I said, with this. Make sure you're pulling your brush towards the areas of highest highlights. Chin, cheekbones. He's really got a set, like, gaunt face look on his face, so really accentuate that with some harsh highlights. Don't get too crazy with doing the forehead or the back of the head, neck, because the hat blocks a lot of it. Same thing down here. Just get it while I'm thinking about it. Just some of the upper areas. Alright, onto the biceps and arms. Again, don't cover up all your shadows that you've built in with your paint. I'm just using the very tip of my brush here to get some of the highest points. Here's where we're at so far. Same thing over here. We'll get the thumb. We'll get a small area of this hand. And a couple of the fingers. If you mess up, flood the area with some water and it'll come right off. Much better. Alright. So I'm going to take a little bit of that tan flesh and I need to grab just a little bit of hardened carapace and mix it back in. Get my color right. And then now I'm going to go into some of the skeleton bone because I want to start desaturating that color. And that'll help take some of the color out of it without making it more pink. Okay. Not quite bright enough. And it's very thin. Working with a very thin paint here. And we're going to get small areas here. We're not going to highlight everything with this. Just get some of the upturned areas. Cheekbones, some of the jawline, a little bit on the ears, not much. Again, right under the eyes, tip of the nose, jawline, eyebrows. Bicep here, or shoulder, some of this bicep muscles. I'm not taking these highlights too far. Like if you watch the other video, I'm going for a very dark and grim world. And so I don't want these highlights to go too far, but I want them to look menacing. So it needs to look muscular and have some definition to them, which is done through highlighting. Same thing here, just the very tops of the fingers that are going to be upturned. Alright, we're going to do one more contrast mix out. And this is going to get just some of the very brightest points. And make sure it's pretty thin so you can feather it, so you can blend easily and pull down towards the highest highlights. And we're just going to get some of the very extreme highlights with this. Make sure you work the brush towards your highest highlights. Very tip of his chin, very tip of his nose, and right under his eyes. Top of his shoulder muscle. Think about light. How would light hit this guy? But remember, for Kingdom Death, it's a very dark world, so there won't be as much light hitting him. Okay. Onto his gallows hand. Just the tips of the fingers. Or the knuckles, depending on where the hand's at. Alright, let me see if I can get a good shot of where we're at as far as the skin tone goes. Trying. The camera doesn't like to focus in that close, that's the problem. So there's where we're at. Skin tones are done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into some of this deep blue that we have. And I'm going to pull out some of that highlight tone that we've done and mix in some of the deep blue. And we're going to give him his veins a little bit of color to them with a very fine brush. So he's got lots of little veins running places. And it's going to be pretty blue because we're going real thin. But mixing in that flesh tone will help blend them together. Let me adjust my lights here because I'm getting some weird shadows on my mini. Went a little bit too blue there. Okay, that's okay. We can fix that. Great. And just be patient with this. It takes some time. He's got little veins running all over his arm, hand, things like that. And we're just trying to give him some color and definition on those. You could dry brush them if you wanted to, but you'll get a dusty look. I don't like that look. The dusty dry brush look on minis. I'll use it for certain things. But not on, usually not on humanoids. Alright, on to his cloak. So, his other hand doesn't have any. We need to make our base tone again, since we are almost out. And that is not it. Mixed in way, way, way too much hardened carapace. And if we get a little bit lighter than our base tone, that's okay, because we're going to do some highlighting. So, really focus on the upturned areas as you work. There we go. And a good thin coats. Make sure your paint's properly thinned out for highlighting. For me, I like to work with it a little bit more thinned out than when I'm doing general base coats. And this is just my style of painting. Everybody has a different style. This is how I paint. So if you notice, I'm not going all the way into the deepest recesses there. I want those to remain that real deep blue-green that we've created. If you are watching this, whether it's live or recorded, and you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I will answer them as soon as I get to them. I try to answer all questions and respond to all comments. Or at least like it to let you know I saw it if I don't have anything to say. Just highlighting these blues. It's going to feel like you're base coating some of these large flat areas, which is essentially what you're doing. But this will be the only highlight that we put on some of these larger areas. Because that's as bright as I want some of those large flat areas to go. We'll mix up another lighter color and take some of those other areas lighter. Remember, pull your brush towards the area of highest highlights, because what you'll end up with is a better layer of paint in the higher areas. So make sure that you're doing that. It makes your job easier later. So be careful around some of these tight creases if you're painting this model along, or if you're just watching this to get an idea of how to paint it. You don't want to lose your shadows that you've got going on. Somehow I got blue on his hat, but that's okay, we can highlight it out later. Alright, so down the chest. And I'm not going to do a whole lot of highlights between his legs there. We'll get some of it. Mostly just a couple of broad brush strokes. Because it's dark in there. It's between his legs, it's not going to get a whole lot of light. Alright. Step 1 is done. Right next to that, we're going to mix in some more blue and go a little bit lighter. Keeping our thin consistency. And we're just going to pick out some of the larger ridges with this. Really focus on some of the more upturned areas. I know I said that before, but this is going to be more focused on those areas that are almost directly facing up. Smaller, more select highlights. Still working with pretty thin down paint. Again, think of where light would hit, even if it's just a little bit. You can make some really stark contrasts with just a little bit of highlights. So like top of the shoulders up here, a little bit brighter. Then moving down the back, thin it out, and feather it into the other color. So wet my brush, clean it, lighter highlights as we go down the back. Sometimes I find if the the highlight line that you're trying to paint is sharp enough, you can turn your brush sideways and kind of run it like this along. Whoops, I'm out of frame. Run it along the mini. I do apologize for painting out of frame for a moment. Sometimes I get so, even though I have like tape lines down to say, hey, paint within this box, I get so caught up in what I'm doing that I don't pay attention to those. Bless it. Got some blue paint somewhere, I didn't want it. Lick your thumb, and it should come right off if it's just a small area. Alright, a little bit brighter. We're almost into that pure deep blue now. And this is just going to be some of our most extreme highlights. Some of those really tall ridges or really defined points that would catch just random rays of light. I guess there's not a whole lot of sun in the Kingdom Death Monster world, but light in general. Highlight around the face, because it brightens up around the face and it helps draw attention to those areas that you want to draw attention to. So what I'm going to try to do is take a little bit thicker paint onto the side of my brush and get some of these higher creases that I was talking about with that side brush technique. Because I don't want to lose all my fine shadows and definition in there. It's not dry brushing really. Just continuing to highlight here. You can do as much or as little work as you want to on this part. And then I'm going to take some of that skeleton bone and I'm going to make some extreme blue highlights to get just some of the really bright points that should stand out. Just to push the contrast just a touch. being real careful not to get it in anywhere I don't want it to go. Fixing mistakes is much harder at this point, so be patient, take your time, think of light theory and where things would hit and bounce and things like that, and it'll make your job much easier on this stage. Alright. Last highlight step. Just taking a little bit more skeleton bone and really brightening it up. And getting some of those most extreme tips. This is going to be a super limited highlights. Alright, let's see if I can show you where we're at. Let me make sure I ever turned my mic back on, I can't recall. I hope I did. I did. Good. Alright. While I'm thinking about it, I think I want to grab some of this gunmetal. I'm going to touch up some of these stakes. Get some of those highlights done. You can even come back and mix in some of that skeleton bone in with it to get some extreme highlights done on there. And then highlight the pistol. This is just straight gunmetal, so I didn't mix in the hardened carapace like I have in other areas. That hardened carapace is just helping to provide a greenish shadow to things that need it. We're going to do the same thing on this bronze that I've got going here. Just straight bronze, thinned out well, and we'll pick out some highlights. There's some really fine details on this pistol that if you can work them, they'll look great. And that's what typically sets your miniature apart from others, is how fine of the detail work can you do. And you do as much as you want to, that's fine. It's how much are you willing to put into it. Like I've said, if you've been watching, I spend a little bit more time on my Kingdom Death Monster miniatures because they are one-off pieces that they're pricey and I want them to look good, so. When I put them on the table for others, I want them to say, wow, those really help add to the immersion of the game. So I spend just a little bit more time on them. Alright, same thing on the sword on the back. Just pick out some of our highlights. We're still leaving some of that deeper color in some areas. Don't want to lose it all. Got some in an area that I didn't want it. So wet my brush and dig it out. It's okay. It's the easiest way to fix mistakes at this level. Once you're doing highlights, is to wet your brush and flood the area. I have a really bad habit of when I wash my brush, I don't always get all the water off the ferrule. And so there will be a bead of water waiting by the ferrule of my brush, and it usually comes off at the most inopportune time, right into my paint, and just splat, waters it all down. So I like to share my snafus with y'all so that you can see that I'm just an average guy with a average guy with a paintbrush. Alright, so this man trap that he's got going on here. We'll get some of the highlights on there. Same thing on the sheath from the front. There's a couple spots I want to do just a little bit more work on the cloak. As I turn them and the light hits them, I can see a few things that I'm like, well, that needs some work right there. Okay. Alright. I may actually take this scaly hide I'm gonna test something real quick on my palette. See how something looks. Take some of my brightest flesh tone, mix in just a touch of scaly hide, and see if it greens it out a little bit that I want for this guy. Way too much scaly hide. Yeah. It's a subtle color addition, but it works. Just for some of the like pecs and larger areas. much better. And then I'm going to just take some of that real thin, scaly hide and apply it to this hand over here and give it a, like it's a bleh color. I don't know how to explain it, but a dead color. I mean, this guy's not really a zombie, but he's not fully there either. So all right, onto our leather color. So for a lot of these highlights, I'm just going with the pure colors that we were using. And with the leather, don't be afraid to be just a little bit conservative, because it makes it appear scratched and scraped and well worn. And that's okay. That's the look we're going for. The idea is this guy's been around hunting and haunting survivors from the world for a while. And I got some brown somewhere I didn't want it. Flood my paintbrush and pull it out of there. What I'll actually do is, after I finish this level of highlights, we'll come back in and add a little bit of a lighter tone and just do some scraping and stuff with it. So like this skeleton bone. And just get some extreme highlights there. Just being a little bit messy with it. And by messy, I mean I'm not being super careful with exactly how I apply it, because I want it to look uneven and scraped and just kind of like this leather has seen and been around the block a little bit. Same thing on his boots, but these highlights won't be as extreme. Make sure to highlight the little bit in the buckle. It's little details like that that help your miniature stand out from other people's. Same thing on the leather on the hat. It's a real easy spot to miss, is the leather and side buckles. Got some on the hat. Lick my finger and get it off. Alright. We're going to go into some pure skeleton bone. I'm going to highlight our little bags here. Really thin. We don't want to lose all that beautiful color we've added with our shades. He's got one back here too. Be super careful working around places you're done working already. And it needs to be thinned out a little bit more. And then on the knee pads, those are going to be skeleton bone as well. Don't forget he's got a little bit of a bone on the arm that he's got detached. Make sure you take your time on these knee pads. They're great secondary focal points. So really make them kind of pop. And the way you can work these is put your first layer on, and then for your second layer where you want it to be brighter, only hit those smaller areas and you can build it up to a purer highlight. Sorry, got something in my eye real quick. That's why you work with thin layers of this color. Still got something in my eye, sorry. So for this side I'm being super extra conservative because he's got a nice crack down the skull that I don't want to lose. Like the bone is cracked, so being really careful. Making sure to work my brush towards the areas of highest highlight where I want that little bit of extra paint to pool. I'm working with just a little bit thicker paint on the highest highlight areas. Same thing for the other side. After we're finished with these skeletons, we're going to go over to the gallows and work on those skeletons. Oh, and the pearls around his wrist, so those are going to be simply just thick paint and dot. Take your time. Okay. But before I go over to work on the gallows, I want to take some of the skeleton bone, grab some of my gunmetal, and lighten it out a little bit. Well, quite a bit actually. Because I want to hit these stakes and really shine them up. Same thing with the flare on the gun. And we'll take that same mix. I may need to get a little bit more gunmetal out on my pot. And we're gonna do a little edge touching on the man trap over there. It's subtle, but the subtleness helps. Same thing for the bronze. Just do some minor edging, highlights, in some of the brightest areas. Don't get too carried away with it. Too much and it kills the effect. Also, if you thin it out too far, it really kills the effect, so. Okay. And there's a couple things that look like they could be brass rings that I'm going to make brass rings on his belt. I'm going to go into some of that scaly green again, and we're going to do just some grotesque working of the hand. Some splotchiness. Make it look like the hand is decomposing. There we go. And what I'll do later is I'll get some of, I have Army Painter's blood effects that I'll use. Alright, set him aside for a minute. We're going to take our skeleton color and we're going to work on our skulls on the skeleton bone. Work on. Sorry about that hiccup there. Had an issue with my internet for a second. Not sure what happened. So, back to our skeletons that we were working on, skulls. And with the bones, it's not a huge deal if they're not perfectly even. My internet's still trying to catch up to whatever hiccup caused it to go kaplunk. I do apologize. Gotta love AT&T sometimes. They are great. Full on sarcasm there. It doesn't appear that I'm going to get my picture quality back, and that bums me out a lot. We'll give it a few more minutes and then I'll try reconnecting it again. But we're just highlighting with that skeleton bone these skull heads. Again, keeping in mind how they'll be oriented on the miniature. Also keeping in mind that decomposing bones are hardly ever perfectly shaded as far as evenness of highlights and things like that. So keep that in mind as you're working on these. A little bit of unevenness in shading. Bone decomposes at different rates, or has different colors if you've ever seen bones that are partially decayed. Right into some of our thicker paint here for some of the more drastic highlights. It's still watered down, it's just not as thin as I had been working with. And then for the bandage on his hand, just some thicker paint for some drastic. Really leave some of that darkness in there to make it look like it's dirty. Again, keep in mind the orientation of your model. Alright, for the ropes, we're going to take some of that dust yellow that we were using. And I had just a little bit of skeleton bone still in my brush. I did not clean it before going from the skeleton bone over there. And we're going to pick out some of these rope lines, being very careful. It helps to keep your paint just a little bit thicker during this part. And I'm just using the side of my brush and picking out some of the rope points. Some of that threading, whatever it's called. Some of the braids. That's what it is, the braids. Try to make sure you don't get it into the recesses of the rope. It's okay if you get it in a few, because we'll come do some highlight picking out with some almost pure skeleton bone next. So you can correct and make up for some of those mistakes in a minute. But do try. I mean, I'm not perfect. I get it in some of the recesses as well. You could, again, you could dry brush this. I'm just not a super fan of the effect that dry brushing produces. Just looks dry brushed. not for small one-off miniatures. I dry brush the heck out of my vehicles when I paint them, especially Star Wars Legion vehicles, because they're supposed to look dusty and dirty and grimy. But one-off miniatures aren't. So just picking out some of the rope highlights. I'm not doing anything too fancy at this point. I'm not doing highlights underneath where there'd be no light hitting. Alright, so now I'm going to go into some of that thicker skeleton bone, and we're going to really mix it in with our paint here. Just a little bit of water. Thin it out a touch, not too much. You don't want it too thin. And we're going to get some of our higher rope highlights with this. So really tiny dots. And you don't have to get every strand of rope with this, just the ones that are upper facing. And I just broke the glue holding this onto the base. Fun times. Again, make sure to keep in mind where this will be oriented on the model and focus on the tops of stuff. Shot there. We'll let that dry for a second before I go back and work on it. Back to the area where I said I put too much. Remember, much like he's dirty and dingy, this rope is going to be dirty and dingy too. It's been drug around the Survivor wasteland that is Kingdom Death Monster. And he's probably killed a few people with this, so we are getting there. I'm just adding a little bit of some of this color to the leather in some select areas to give it some depth. Nothing too fancy. Excuse me, sorry about that. This will help add to that dirty effect, that scratched and dirty effect. And what I'll do is I'll actually come in under some of these darker areas on the skulls and use this to darken some of the areas. I know it's our highlight for some other areas, but it'll add some color difference to some of those areas. So it's not just skeleton bone. Bones are actually very colorful. Lots of blues and different hues of, not blue, sorry, lots of hues of brown, so I was trying to say hue and brown at the same time and came out blue. So we're also going to do the same thing on the knee pads here. Okay. We need to do the wood on this, and then our gallows is done. Alright, so some of the pure oak brown, and we're just going to pick out some of the corners and stuff, some of the higher areas. I'm really running my brush along sideways to pick out some of the higher areas with thicker paint so it doesn't want to flow too much. We don't want to lose all those subtle color differences that we've managed to put in there. And we'll do a few things here with the wood to make it look worn and old and dusty in just a minute. Alright, so back to our dust yellow. We're going to take some of that, mix in some of our oak brown, and make an exposed wood color, and really run that along different areas where we think it would be worn. So like the edges, of course, the corners. Again, subtlety sometimes is key. You don't want to cover everything with this brighter color, but give the wood some character. Wood has lots of different colors of browns in it. Then we'll take a little bit more dust yellow and mix it in. And we'll pick out a few more of those more select areas. Okay, too much. Better. Did it again, too much. I'm going to take some of that skeleton bone and mix it in to get a real pine color, and we'll hit some of these extreme highlights with that. Make sure you thin this down just a little bit, not too much. Be very selective with this color. Like I already had in mind where I wanted this to kind of go when I made the color, so. just giving the wood some, at least carrying some character.